Like when I hear Saliva, the first thing that comes to mind is some girl with that like streaky 2000s hair, bootcut jeans, and a Fox Racing bikini top, yelling, "Woo!" What's up, everybody? I'm Finn McKenty, and this is the Punk Rock MBA. Can you believe that there was a time where this and this were cool? Like, imagine it was 1987 and you met an alien that descended to Earth and they were like, "So what music do you humans enjoy these days?" You'd be like, "Well, actually there's this one band with like neon green guitars and bedazzled trench coats." But it wasn't just the 80s, and I'm not talking about hair metal. As recently as the 2000s, stuff like this was all over the radio and crushing the Billboard Top 10. But that was a long time ago, and as I'm sure you've noticed, it's been quite a while since really any rock bands were that relevant. And my question is, what happened? How did rock go from like dominating the conversation and being the life of the party to being the dude standing there awkwardly in the back of the room with his arms crossed, hoping somebody notices him and talks to him? Well, I think there's a few factors there, but in this video, I want to talk about one very simple but very important reason for that. Rock stopped being fun. The bands got so uptight, started taking themselves so seriously, that the music was really no longer the soundtrack to good times. Rock lost the plot. So in this video, I'm gonna explain exactly what I mean, try to pinpoint the specific moment in time that rock stopped being fun, and share a few glimmers of hope for the future of rock. But first, if you haven't, please subscribe and turn on notifications so you get all my videos when they come out. And also, I wanted to mention my new merch. I have this pop punk shirt and this neon cartoon monster shirt by Michael Shantz. And if you want to pick them up, there's a link to both of those in the description. And with that out of the way, let's get into it. Let me start by presenting you with a very simple but important idea. People like fun. And for most people, fun means hanging out and doing stuff with other people, like dancing and laughing and having a couple drinks and meeting new people. Not going to shows that are wall-to-wall dudes with beards, standing there motionless with their arms crossed trying to figure out what kind of pickups the guitarist is using. There's nothing wrong with that. I'm just saying that for most people, that's not their idea of fun. And generally speaking, people like music that can be the soundtrack to fun, or at least kind of make them feel like they're out having fun, even if they're listening to it at their desk at work or whatever. And I know some of you are already probably having this like visceral reaction to what I just said, like,
"My music is not the vapid soundtrack for normies to party to."
And that is totally fine. I'm not saying that's what all music should be by any means, or even that that's the only kind of music that's marketable. We know that's not true because there's tons of pop songs that are sad and melancholy. For example,
I took a pill in Ibiza to show Avicii I was cool.
I'm just saying that from a marketing perspective, in order for a genre to be relevant in pop culture, like rock was until fairly recently, it needs to have at least some artists and songs that make people feel like they're having fun. And rock these days just doesn't really seem to have any interest in that. Rock's vibe these days is more like hanging out in the comments of a Reddit thread than going to a party. And to give you an idea of exactly what I mean, let's back up and talk about how we got here. In the beginning, rock and roll was all about fun. It was the party genre in the 50s and 60s. Things got a little bit less dance party in the 70s, but that sort of subtext of partying was still there. I mean, this is the decade that gave us yacht rock, which is just party music for rich guys. We had it all. Which brings us to the 80s, which let's just say were very interesting for music in general, but in particular rock. Listening to some of the stuff that was like a mainstream radio hit back then is crazy because most of it was either like unimaginably corny or just fucking weird. You may ask yourself, how do I work this? Like, how was that a radio hit? But all of that being said, it was ultimately still fun music. Even metal was fun, or at least the most mainstream version of it, hair metal. Which brings us to the 90s. And if you're saying, it's here, grunge, this is where rock stopped being fun, right? Kind of, you aren't wrong, but I don't think it's that exactly. Because the thing to understand about grunge is that it was part of something much bigger. This is when pop culture in general is taking a much darker turn. And if I had to point to two really pivotal moments in the 90s, the first would be Nevermind by Nirvana, which came out in 1991. You've probably heard people in various documentaries talk about how it just completely changed music overnight, and I agree with that. They're right, the impact of that album really cannot be overstated. That is what put grunge on the map, and that stuff does get really, really fucking dark. Like all the Alice in Chains songs are basically like Lane Staley telling us that he was gonna die. And the second big thing was on the rap side of things, Nothing But a G Thing by Dr. Dre and Snoop Dogg in 1992.
1, 2, 3 into the 4. Snoop Doggy Dogg and Dr. Dre is at the door.
Which changed rap in pretty much the same way that Nirvana changed rock. Suddenly, hammer pants were out, and smoking weed and being a gangster was cool. And all the corny pop rappers like MC Hammer were scrambling to make a gangster album, just the same way as all the hair metal bands scrambled to make a grunge album. And it was embarrassing to watch in both cases. But like I said, it wasn't just music. Movies also got darker. Like if you compare big movies of the 90s like Pulp Fiction, Natural Born Killers, The Matrix, or Seven to their 80s equivalents like say Back to the Future, the contrast is crazy. Before it's like, welcome to the 80s, life is good. When do we get hoverboards and shoes that tie themselves? But just a few years later in the 90s, it was like, hey, did you know that if somebody ODs, you can save them by stabbing them in the heart with this massive fucking needle? So yes, rock did get darker in the 90s, but so did everything else. And remember, there's much more to rock than just grunge. There were tons of much more fun, upbeat, and massively popular rock bands in the 90s as well. The Offspring and Green Day are two obvious examples from like the punk side of things. There's also like Third Eye Blind, Lit, Hootie and the Blowfish, Sugar Ray, Eve 6, 311, all of which worked great as the soundtrack to good times. And of course there was also nu metal, some of which did get very dark, but there were also bands like Limp Bizkit, Crazy Town, and POD who were nu metal but still like very high energy with a lot of basically fun party songs. Which brings us to the 2000s. By this point, I think rock had lost some ground to rap and pop in terms of cultural relevance, but it wasn't out of the game. I would argue that this is when Southern rap kind of really took over as the dominant form of like party music, starting with like Lil Jon and all the crunk stuff, which is pretty much the ultimate fun music. I mean, you go to a wedding now, and there's a very good chance that you're gonna hear Snap Your Fingers. But that said, rock in the 2000s was still capable of being the soundtrack to good times. Even stuff like post-grunge, aka butt rock, yes, it was kind of angsty and mopey at times, but if you think about it, stuff like Click Click Boom or Buckcherry is totally just party music for the military wife demographic. Like when I hear Saliva, the first thing that comes to mind is some girl with that like streaky 2000s hair, bootcut jeans, and a Fox Racing bikini top, yelling, "Woo!" Or all those white belt kind of bands with "the" in their name. For example, the White Stripes, the Strokes, the Killers, or my personal favorites in that little subgenre, Kaiser Chiefs, even though they technically didn't have a "the" in their name. And you may not think of this as fun music, but to me, it was clearly party music for hipsters. When I hear this stuff, I instantly think of some couple who look like they fell out of an American Apparel photo shoot, drinking PBRs at some dive bar while this stuff plays in the background, which is the hipster version of fun. Trying very hard to look like you're not having fun, because you are way too cool to enjoy anything. And in the alternative world, this is where we saw the rise of the mall emo scene. Fall Out Boy, My Chemical Romance, Paramore, The Used, and so forth, which was pretty angsty, but it was still fun. I mean, Dance Dance is super fun and catchy, and it even has the word dance in the title, although if you ask Pete Wentz, it's probably some elaborate metaphor for some terrible dark thing. I don't know. But you get my point, and remember, these were huge mainstream Billboard top 10 bands. And of course, there was the pop punk scene, which I've talked about a million times. And a couple years later, the neon pop punk stuff like Boys Like Girls, All Time Low, and Metro Station. which is pretty much party music for 6th graders. Or the whole crunkcore scene, Broken Side, Millionaires, Hollywood Undead. Pretty much all of their songs are about partying. And even the heavier stuff like metalcore and deathcore, which may have been pretty dark in general, but still had an element of fun to it. For example, the video for Chelsea Smile by Bring Me the Horizon is a big party. Like, they were this heavy, edgy band, but they still partied. It still made you feel like it was fun to listen to them, and I have to think that was a big part of why they blew up the way that they did. The overall point that I'm making here is that as recently as the late 2000s, there's a whole variety of different kinds of rock bands that were all hitting the top of the charts, that had a place in mainstream pop culture, which ultimately I think is what a lot of rock fans would love to see again. And I think a big part of that is because back then, rock could still be the soundtrack to good times. And remember, people like fun. Which brings us to the 2010s, which I think is really where rock lost the plot. And if I had to point to one specific year, I would say 2013. At this point, rock was almost completely gone from pop culture and the charts. I guess if you want to call like Maroon 5 and Imagine Dragons rock, there's that. But however you want to look at it, the point is that it was a far cry from the 80s or 90s or even the 2000s, when rock bands were more or less competitive with pop and rap in terms of cultural influence. And I point to 2013 as the year that happened for a couple reasons. Number one, this is right about when the EDM boom was happening. At this point, EDM was the default soundtrack to good times, at least for your average normie, and it was very clear that the torch had been passed. The DJ was the new rock star, and the people who would have been the singers of rock bands were now choosing to become DJs instead. Sonny Moore, aka Skrillex, is of course the ultimate example who literally did exactly that. Zedd is another example. He was in a Sumerian core band that was actually pretty good. And as a lot of you guys know, Steve Aoki has a very, very deep history in punk and hardcore, as just a couple examples. And in parallel to that, this is when pop was getting really wild. Like, there was that whole mini trend of songs about eating ass, such as
He twists my salad like his name, Romaine.
And
I might let your boy show for me, but he gotta eat the booty like groceries.
And I think you also have to talk about country here as well. This is when we saw the rise of like Walmart bro pop country with songs about drinking and pickup trucks really take over. Florida Georgia Line and all that. Meanwhile, rock was doubling down on the seriousness and signing everybody up for the No Fun Club. Blink-182 went all gritty and dark on Neighborhoods. Paramore turned into a new wave band, and every Warped Tour band pretty much did the same. Like, even pop punk got super serious. In 2002, a pop punk band meant dudes in Dickies shorts and a Hurley shirt singing about farting on their mom or whatever. And in 2013, a pop punk band meant guys with thick-rimmed glasses and that Instagram fade haircut with denim vests and Telecasters doing the shouty vocals about a girl thing. And there is no value judgment here. I'm not saying one of those things is good or bad. I'm just saying that if you are a random normie looking for some new music, which of these things is gonna be more appealing to you? On this side, doing Molly at EDC while Steve Aoki plays EDM bangers and Nicki Minaj talking about eating ass? Or on this side, some generic band dudes with beards and denim vests, standing with their arms crossed, scowling in front of an abandoned building or whatever. And again, I'm not saying that one of those things is better than the other, and at this point in my life, I would rather lick the stage sweat off of Kid Rock's back than go to some EDM festival. But it's not about what I like, and it's not even about what you like, it's about them and what they like. And if rock has something that the larger world of pop culture consumers are gonna be interested in. And remember, people like fun. And on that note, I've mostly talked about this in terms of the music and lyrical themes, but I want to be clear that this is about everything. It's about the total package. It's the music, yes, but it's also the way the artists dress, their overall lifestyle, what kind of content they're putting out on social media. It's their music videos. It's literally everything. At the end of the day, it's about, does this genre paint a picture of a lifestyle that people find cool and interesting and entertaining? For example, let's look at music videos. I'm not saying that every music video has to be some sort of like borderline softcore porn thing, or that everybody should copy rap videos where they flex all their cars and watches and shit, because that's not what I'm saying. That would be super corny too. The point is to understand why those are such common tropes in pop and rap videos. It's because they paint a picture of a lifestyle that audiences find compelling. It's that simple. I mean, what do you think is gonna be more appealing to the average person? Rubi Rose dancing in her underwear? Or some generic rock guy crying in the bathtub?
Get the money, sis, get the money.
Somewhere along the way, rock bands lost the plot. They forgot that music is a form of entertainment, that audiences want to see larger than life people doing larger than life things, to take them away from their problems and give them a chance to blow off some steam. And I think this misunderstanding on the part of rock bands is a huge part of what's holding the genre back. Would it be so bad just to have a little bit more fun? But will that happen? Is rock gonna change and wake up to this? Honestly, I don't know. On the one hand, I think that culture is oftentimes cyclical, and since rock has been in such a serious place for so long, part of me thinks that we're primed for rock to start being fun again, kind of like how punk was a reaction to the like stale, overproduced, corny shit of the 70s. Like yacht rock. And there are people who give me some hope. MGK being the most recent example of that. He clearly gets it. He said,
"And the state of rock and roll depends on rock stars."
He's 100% right. And his music and videos are all about painting a picture of that 2000s pop punk lifestyle that was super appealing to all those millions of people 20 years ago.
I did Warped Tour, and these would wear comfortable shoes on stage every day.
But on the other hand, the rock world's reaction to MGK makes me a little bit less optimistic. Hey Machine Gun Kelly, when I was on Warped Tour, I slept in a 100-degree van with 5 people for 2 months, walked a million miles in the sun, and showered by someone standing on the trailer hitch dumping water over my head. Fuck that if I wanted to wear comfy shoes. Dear MGK, I don't wear my Doc Martens on tour because it wastes time taking them off to pee when I'm sleeping on the bench in the van on the night drive from Denver to Salt Lake. I know I'm very comfortable, but please can I still have my rock card from a multi-millionaire rapper? People got so butthurt about his obviously sarcastic joke that he actually apologized for it. To the bands mad, I said they were comfy shoes. I'm very sorry that I can get you this upset just by talking about your little pointy New Balances. I wear pink, so like, what do I know anyway? This is where we're at now? Bands are offended because you made a joke about their shoes? Guys, let me just spell it out for you. He was not literally talking about your shoes. He was making a comment on the larger culture of rock and how they view their role as entertainers. I mean, can you imagine like Axl Rose or Bruce Springsteen or Hayley Williams getting all defensive and butthurt by that comment? No, because they stay busy doing what actually matters, entertaining their fans. So am I saying that every band has to write vapid party songs like fucking Buckcherry or Poison or whatever? Absolutely not. But I am saying that rock fans and bands need to take a very large chill pill and remind themselves of what made rock and roll popular in the first place back in the 1950s. That people like fun. All right, my friends, that does it for this video. I'd love to hear what you think in the comments. Do you think that rock has lost the plot in terms of being fun? If you disagree, I'd love to hear why. Or if you just don't like my whole idea of fun being important, I would love to hear why as well. Before I let you go, I wanted to mention my email newsletter. I put out a lot of content. I know it's hard to keep track of all of it, so I started a free email newsletter that I put out every week. I just send a link to any videos on my main channel, on my second channel, anything I do on my podcast, if I do any press appearances. So you can sign up for that at the link in the description. I also want to thank everybody who supports us on Patreon, especially those of you who support at the True Cult level or above. It is because of your support that we're able to do the podcast. Patrons get every podcast a week early. There's a members only private Discord server. I do patron only Q&As now. There's a way to have me review your band or music video or design portfolio or anything else you might want to get my feedback on. So if you want to check that out, there's a link to that in the description as well. And with that, I'm going to sign off for now, but I will see you next time.